What if our oceans could be more abundant tomorrow than they were yesterday? Not just preserved, but restored to life. What if science, technology, and human optimism could come together to regenerate ecosystems we once believed were lost? Hey, everybody. I'm Stephen Schauer. Welcome back to Stories Sustain Us, the podcast where we explore the transformative power of human stories to create a more sustainable world. Today, we're diving back into the second half of our eye-opening conversation with Fritz Neumeyer, co-founder and CEO of Oceans 2050. If you missed last week's episode, I highly recommend going back to part one, where we began unpacking the profound role personal legacy, storytelling, and collective action play in shaping the future of ocean restoration. In part two, we continue that journey, picking up where we left off, to explore how shifting from a mindset of conservation to one of restoration isn't just a lofty idea. It's a tangible, data-driven, and human-centered strategy. We talk about generational optimism, the real economic value of healthy ecosystems, the role of AI and quantum technologies in environmental stewardship, and how collaboration across political, ideological, and cultural divides can unlock solutions we once thought impossible. Fritz brings a fascinating perspective to this mission. As an architect with a passion for science, sport, and philosophy, Fritz is literally building the architecture of ocean restoration, together with his wife, Alexandra Cousteau, who is the co-founder and president of Oceans 2050. With a master's from ETH Zurich and a background steeped in classical education, he is helping to design not just tools, but entire systems that can scale marine restoration globally. The vision for Oceans 2050 is bold, inclusive, and grounded in the belief that we can restore abundance within one generation if we act together. So whether you care about the oceans, ecosystems, innovation, or simply the future of our planet, stick with us. This is a conversation that will challenge how you think and leave you feeling hopeful for what's possible. Let's dive back into part two of our conversation with Fritz Neumeyer here on Stories Sustain Us, where we are inspiring action through the power of storytelling.
That's when we founded Oceans 2050. And I got really involved sort of from the early days here because of that narrative change. And that's where the name comes from, right?
Yeah.
Like restoring abundant oceans in one human generation, 2050, that's the benchmark.
Yeah. And it's real clear in your purpose, right? Your purpose statement is return the oceans to abundance. I mean, that is a simple tagline to explain to somebody. What do you do? We're returning the oceans to abundance.
Mm-hmm. And then
jump on board and join us, right?
Yeah, and what really, the other pillar to it again, is Carlos with his thinking, and the science. And for a long time, sort of we had this. One of the first things we always would talk about is sort of from science to action. That we're not here to. Yes, one of the early things we need to do now is to kind of advocate and. I don't want to say apostatize here, but to bring out this paradigm shift. That's something we actually want to introduce across the field. So we've done protection and conservation for many decades now. It's worked sort of in the time it was invented, and we can say all of this with utmost respect because Alexandra's father was one of the people who co-coined that ethic.
Yeah.
And we don't, there's not even any need for negativity. We can just say, look, where we are now is that this is not a tool that will get us where we want.
Yeah.
And I think there's this other truth that we were talking about this earlier. I think it's this general thing we can accept that sort of the solutions of today are the problems of tomorrow and the other way around.
Sure.
Right.
Sure.
And so these mechanisms are 5 decades old, and there's time for an update.
Yeah. And it's the natural progression of things. I mean, in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, we had collectively, conservation was the dominant thought process because we kind of metaphorically, we had to stop digging the hole. So protecting what was still there was the natural step at the time. And now we're at the next step of, well, let's rebuild and restore what we've lost, so that's, I think, the natural progression of the process.
Absolutely. I'm so glad you said that. So, yeah, because I mean, I think that's another thing that we can say out of just pure appreciation, that
Right.
It's a natural instinctive reaction. So
Yeah.
again, just take the human perspective of Alexandra's father, right? So he's the guy who's, as a kid, my story as an architect, here's the guy who's like, his father's exploring the ocean and bringing them to the world.
Yeah.
And so he's growing up with that, and by osmosis, he obviously ends in that business. But he sees sort of the magical moments of his childhood, right? That his father would take him to, this great grandeur of exploration.
Yeah.
20 years later, as an adult, he's like, I see the stuff dying.
Right.
Right. And that's, in a way, maybe that's another, we skipped that one, but like the one thing that really hurts, I would see in Alexandra's eyes, like the spark on, but I remember she came back from a trip to, I would guess it was Sipadan in Malaysia, sort of one of those traditionally acclaimed, like the paradise dive spots diving left in the world.
Yeah.
And she came back and she literally, I don't want to dive anymore.
Oh, wow.
Right. Like if this is the best it gets, right? It's like, I'm going to these places.
Yeah. Gotten so.
And she's like, and all I see is the ghosts of my friends of the past.
Oh, that's.
And I was like, oh,
that hurts deep. Yeah.
Right. And so that's, if you take her father's perspective, that like, hey, we need to conserve and protect this stuff here. Right. That's the first instinct. And
absolutely.
At the same time, if there's still enough riches there, that's viable. So we're just now at the next stage.
Right.
There's interesting, we can get to something really fascinating for me at the moment, which is we can maybe even like take two steps at this moment, right?
Yeah.
So like we say, restore, rebuild abundance. The interesting thing is, it's still a right? It's sort of in an interesting, that too is understandable and instinctive, where you can say, hey, okay, we've lost a lot, let's rebuild what we had. It might be, we're looking at this a lot. It might be more interesting to just focus on a future, right? Because you could make this case that it's kind of hard to move ahead fast if you're looking backwards. And maybe, it's much better to just focus on what are visions on the futures that work for both sides, right?
Yeah.
Because it's interesting to see that, like when you're looking at what we're seeing now, this time of where we're just seeing a lot of polarity, where like people are on both camps, and there's a lot of sort of finger pointing, antagonizing, a lot of sort of retreating in different ideology, and a lot of fighting over which one is right and which one is wrong.
Yeah.
And it's interesting to see that on both sides, we have our different ways of doing our and our nostalgia, right? On the environmental side, we're talking about rebuilding, and there's this great time of, and on others, sort of, let's say, more conservative. So, that's how when we say conservation, and we're conservatives, but we mean this in a nature way.
Yeah.
And then that fraction is kind of angry at the people who are talking about being conservative and wanting to rebuild things like from a moral perspective,
right?
And it's just it's interesting how we do the same thing, but we then point the finger at the other side for doing that thing and wanting to go back to a world that's past.
That's fascinating. That's a great point.
So maybe when we talk about rebuilding abundant oceans, luckily, like, abundant oceans is neutral enough, right? That's an idea, and it's
everybody should be able to get behind that.
So, but I think what we really want to focus on where we are now in the organization is, like, how do we build a vision of a future here that works for both sides equally?
Right.
So we're skipping a lot of steps here, but we can fill out more, because this is one of my favorite things.
I appreciate getting there. Yeah. So tell me more about that.
Yeah, a lot. It's even a lot of it is actually even in the terminology, right? We just sort of, conservation means a very different thing to an environmentalist than it does to someone who's sort of interested in moral history or with value models or whatever it is. But it's the same word we use.
Economics or a different thing, right?
Yeah, and so that's the great news about abundant oceans, right? Abundance is as much an economic term as it is a romantic one.
Right.
And so we literally, if you want to make it into really simple language, when we have rich oceans, we have rich culture and rich economies, right? And we can look at those two things in equal value, and we kind of want to, right? One of the big things we want to achieve here now is to make sure that we kind of help both sides find ground on what we agree on, sort of common ground.
Yeah.
And that what it means from our side of the camp. Our side, I mean, like environmental, NGO, institutional, whatever you want to call it. Is embracing this really important truth that, like, the word abundance can mean something very different to an economist who will look at the ocean more as a resource,
right,
than to someone who maybe comes from an ocean history legacy where it's really just about the magic and the life, right?
Yeah.
But those both ways of looking at it are actually, they're equally justified and relevant.
Yeah.
And
sustenance fishermen in a village that needs, that's where they get their livelihood and their food from. I mean,
or on a larger scale, the $14 billion recreational fishing industry of Florida.
Yeah.
Right. It's a very important and relevant, like, economic reality.
Absolutely.
That, we want to be working with sort of. So I'll make this really simple. What we really want for these next steps is to stop fighting over whether our ideology is right or not, and thinking that you have to see, if you have to care about the ocean because of the magic, not the resource. Like, that's a really big jump for everyone to make.
Yeah.
Okay, now we broke our storyline here a little bit.
No, and I'm kind of keeping tabs of the time as well. So I think your jump to that is a good timing as well. So how does this, and what I hear you describing is, in sustainability talk, is kind of that triple bottom line, the people, planet, profit. You're trying to find that sweet spot, that the people that care about a resource for its economic value, or what they can obtain from that resource, is their voice matters. The planet matters, the environment matters. It doesn't necessarily have a voice, so we need to have a voice for it. And then the quality of life for people, and whether it's the romantic enjoyment of the ocean or the recreational use of it, that sweet spot of bringing people together, not necessarily, getting people out of their trenches, out of their, I got to fight and defend my perspective, and finding a place where we can all stand together, because we're all kind of trying to get to the same spot. We might be thinking about it differently, but we're all trying to get to that same spot of abundance, and it's available to us if we work together, as opposed to fighting each other over who's got the right reason to do it. Like, no, we all have our reasons to do it, but let's work together to get there.
Right.
Did I say all that correctly? That's
great. We can, hold my beer. I'm just going to get myself a little bit more water here into my glass, and then we can go into that.
Sure.
Yeah, so that's a topic where we can tie and untie a lot of knots. But the way you set it up is I think is sort of the core of the matter. And this is it's for romantics of it. It's for us who just want to get stuff done. It's the same for economists. It's financial theory. Whatever angle you want to take, you get to the same spot, right?
Yeah.
So, let's just stay with those words for a second. Like, abundance means it's rich, right? So that's the non-fancy term is
right.
It's rich of stuff. So, let's take a coral reef, right? So, for those who haven't been, those are like, imagine the rainforests with all their riches and all the crazy life going on and all that beautiful stuff, right? That's what a coral reef is under the water, right? It's sort of the crown jewel of ocean ecosystems. It's, home to most of the life. you can call it biodiversity, or you can call it lots of beautiful fishy things. And
right.
Nature builds these things over millions of years. They grow up in calcium, and they have these beautiful blossoms on top. But so that place is this magical thing full of lights and colors and life. And if you like scuba diving, right, that's what you care about. It's a magical experience. But that same let's take that human experience has magical value, right? But it also has real economic value.
Absolutely.
When you talk about recreational fishing or diving, it's just one of my numbers. Just the one number that I can't ever forget is like 14 billion in Florida is recreational fisheries, right?
Yeah.
That's not people out that go out to because they have to catch dinner, right? That's people that go out because they want to be there.
Right.
And then the diving industry in Mexico, right? There's, I think, I don't have the exact numbers anymore, but it was, the difference between Mexico's annual revenue from diving tourism and its entire revenue from fisheries, which is getting fish out of the water to kill them and sell them, is like 5%.
Yeah.
I say it's like 970 million for fisheries and 910 for recreational diving. You're like, okay, wait, this resource when it's alive is probably more value to you than when you kill it, just because
you drain it. Right.
The experience is really interesting. But so that back to that coral reef, like that same coral reef is also responsible for producing most of the life in the ocean around you, right? So if you like to fish or have people going out to fish, like that reef is what makes those fish be in the ocean. Lots of them,
right?
Well, all of them are. So it's responsible for lots of your fishery value. So that same reef is also, especially if it's like coupled with things like seagrasses and mangroves, is also responsible for protecting your coasts from 95% of the wave energy, which means massive economic implications for storms and floods.
For coastal cities, right?
Yeah, we're like, let's stay in Florida, where you've got places with the highest density of real estate value in the world, right? That's a really important thing.
Yeah, right? They're already seeing flooding and, sunny day flooding, they call it in Fort Lauderdale, because the high tides are already flooding neighborhoods without rain. Right.
And that's a real, right? So the fires of California or the floods of Florida, right? That's a real economic thing here. So
absolutely.
Long story short, whichever way you want to look at it, right? Like a flourishing reef and an ecosystem that delivers all of that gives all of us what we want, whether we want it for an experience and the ideology and because we think life is sacred and should be there and humans shouldn't kill it, because, from a scriptures perspective, or from like the most liberal and progressive whatever perspective.
Yeah,
it's
the same thing. Economic dollar perspective, right?
Or for the guy who calculates your insurance premiums, right? It's the same research. So that's the great news. If we can leave ideology aside and stop fighting over that you should be wanting that there because of what I think is the reason it should be there,
right?
And let's be honest here, the people who. So it's our camp who puts the ideological pressure cramps on, right? It's like we're the ones who come in and
oftentimes,
doctrine and be like, you need to, the fish is sacred because it's beautiful, and the birds can, and then it's the economists who are kind of like poo-pooing those idealists over in the corner, right? And so the real power is, hey, that reef delivers what you want, what I want, what they want, what what the fishery, what the tax office wants, what the fishing license salaries want. Like, if we can get everyone together to connect these value streams, and if we can work with you over there on the insurance perspective to figure out how to finance this, and if these really smart economists over here can help us to better account for and sort of value this coral reef as an asset, we'll treat it differently. We'll have smarter numbers about what economic impacts are, because ecologic impacts are, because we'll be able to translate ecologic impacts into economy, and all of a sudden we have this representation of what we call Mother Nature in both accounting books, sort of our hearts and our
spreadsheets. Yeah,
and that's where it needs to be, right? And we talked in our earlier conversations about your prior work and sort of how you can create successes by combining these different
sharing all these different narratives
approaches. Because the one other thing that in this, admittedly very tumultuous period of change, right, is that like any other period of change, right? Like when things are broken up, that's both a challenge and a massive opportunity to reconfigure stuff. And you know, without wanting to sound too preachy here, but I think it's a general human theme that when those moments come, the more you're ready to question yourself and let go of stuff that maybe was in the way, the faster you usually tend to get ahead into the next phase of maturity or development. And that's the opportunity now, really.
There's
for our sake.
big opportunity.
Talked about this as well. You know, one other thing, and I'm going to be a little careful about this one, but this 1% for the planet thing is something I love to talk about. Right, you know, 1% for the planet, for those who aren't familiar, is this pledge that that companies take. So to say that they're dedicating whatever 1% of their profits or their revenues to good causes, and while obviously that's, you know, it's a nice thing, the mindset for me is just it's a statement of one of our big issues, right? So architecture, economy, physics, mathematics, whatever it is, like it's a disaster if you want to, you know, do something and you use 1% of your energy to try to build something up that you're probably ripping down with the other 99. You're going nowhere. Right. So our simple truth is that that's something that we've struggled with for a while. And I think the other admission that we want to do here is that, you know, coming off of what we talked about earlier, these ideas of conservation and protection were translated into institutions, right? And those institutions were meant to slow things down.
Yeah.
Right? That 100%. Was our idea.
Yeah.
And, you know, you could say, okay, like they did slow a lot of the burning down. And, you know, we did have a lot of really, really important sort of environmental structuring, legal acts, institutions that were, you know, born out of sort of, you know, Reagan was kind of the guy who, you know, built a lot of these, right? So, what we want to look at now is that I think the first simple reality is that institutions are never effective at creating outcomes. You know, they're those, especially not when they're meant to slow things down.
Right.
And now that we're coming off of this period and saying, hey, you know, we need to rebuild abundance, it's literally in the words, right? These institutions that were meant to protect and conserve and slow down are now getting in the way of building stuff back.
Right.
And that's
absolutely.
They're not only getting in the way, I think we're asking the wrong people to do it, right? Science, this is really important from my perspective. So I've had this marvelously blessed position, right? I've got Carlos and I've got Alexandra who have these big ocean names. And so nobody ever cares about who I am. So I get to sit in the back seat, but I'm around all these wonderful, beautiful people. Right? And this sort of the one great benefit if when you move from the private sector, like, you know, as an architect into this world, is that you just get to be surrounded by all these beautiful people. And at the same time, if you're used to the way things get done in sort of the professional world, it's amazingly frustrating to watch how philanthropy works, institution works. Like, these processes are so inefficient. They're so much of their energy is spent in self-governance, administration, funding, rules, report writing, grant. Like, it's sort of, we've never applied for a grant if I had to write I couldn't, right? So that's that 1% problem, right? But to go into the 99 and get that energy, right? We need to operate more in that mechanism, which is accountability, you know, return on investment, client service propositions, you know, a self-assessment, what works, what doesn't, clarity. Like, these are efficiency. These are very different sort of operating principles than in science. You know, one of the things, for example, is in science, you can't make mistakes, right? Like, if you make cardinal mistakes, your reputation's bummed. We all know that, you know, in business, you have to be able to do stuff and be ready for it to maybe not work, and then stand up for and say, okay, it didn't, but now we're smarter, right? So we've been asking if we're really switching from conservation to protection, and we want to rebuild stuff. You know, Carlos is open about this. You know, so I'm not getting on. He always says, like, from a, you know, the scientists, we kind of know what to do. Now we need people who can actually, you know, build. We need engineers and like all these hybrid people. And that's one of the good news for the for the next chapter, that these paradigm shifts that with our new administration in the US are just sort of getting, speed tracked at a breathtaking pace.
Yeah.
They are going to open up avenues to very different thinking and energy mechanisms. And we talked about, like, you've had this public-private partnerships. Like, how do we get the best of both worlds?
Yeah.
To work together.
Streamline regulations so you can actually build something and not get stuck and never actually getting from an idea to an on the ground thing because you're regulated, or lawsuited into regulations. So
because just one specific thing here, right? So we're involved in a lot of really interesting things in Florida, right? Where many of the people in charge are like this. It's been such an interesting human experience, and I can honestly say this after years sort of in the Western liberal ideological world. It's so refreshing. Like, I've got sort of these people are like, I've got quotes that are taking me sort of into the future that are, this is sort of the very, very different to the other side of the personal spectrum, from down to, I went to Jesuit school, so right, like, I'm happy with sort of religious roots, right? It's not my own upbringing, but I deeply appreciate it. So over there's like, Christian Republican value systems, but man, right, there's so much clarity in some of those principles of how things need to work, right?
Yeah.
And even specifically, like, coming from Europe, Florida is like the a real counterexample, and culturally, fiscally, right. But that work over the last couple of months has been so illustrative about, oh wow, like, we get the best of both worlds. We're going to have amazing products.
Yeah.
Right. Because this slowness institutional thing is like, it gets in the way of so many different aspects. And really, like, the simplest of clarity is like, in order to get stuff moving, you need to focus on outcomes and selling propositions and how to get the best of both worlds and get stuff done. Right. And
I think it's that changing process. The institutions that, the EPA was created under Nixon, right, in the early 70s, in this time of the conservation ethic that we were talking about earlier. That made sense at the time. We have to stop the damage. There's acid rain. There's, all of the we can't breathe the air. We can't drink the water. The Cuyahoga River caught on fire, right? So it made sense at the time. That we have to slow things down. We have to stop this from happening. Therefore, the regulations come in, and the industry, the agencies that implement these regulations were created. But everything you're saying is resonating deeply with me about, if we're going to rebuild, if we're going to restore, if we're going to take constructive action, creative action, we need to loosen up. We need to be able to move faster, and it's a changing time, and it is a fascinating and an interesting time. It's a scary time, and it's an exciting time. I mean, it's all happening right now, and I'm glad you're at the forefront of it and seeing these, the opportunities that are happening, that are opening up because of the changing times that we're in.
Yeah, let me to give you some concrete examples, building on
please,
on things you specifically just said. So one of the really remarkable moments of like these our Florida involvements was down there in the sanctuary. There was a meeting in which one of the sort of the local stakeholders was addressing the issues they were having with, let's say, the sort of this institutional blockage idea, right? And is highly respectful and sort of in great dialogue. But there were a couple of moments of this honest clarity that were just really great. One of the sentences that really struck me is sort of in a public address. He says, look, we've been watching you manage yourself to less losses for 34 years, right? And that is such a damning statement, right?
Yeah.
We've been watching you manage yourself to less losses. And basically, so I'm going to paraphrase here now, is like, it's just not good enough, right? Because this is an interesting thing, parallel to what you just said in terms of, when the EPA came in, like those Nixon and Reagan. Like, what we want to understand is like that environmental appreciation, right? The way we've used the terms, they've gone all the way to the left, right?
Yeah.
But we want to understand that sort of appreciation of nature is not a lefty Democrat thing, right? It's like recreational fishery, or these guys down there, like Floridians, they're used to fishing and hunting, right? But when you hear them talking about nature, there's often a more pure and authentic connection than the academic advocates. Right?
Yeah.
Like
farmers and ranchers I worked with in South Texas were some of the best conservationists and environmentalists. They wouldn't have called themselves that, but that's
it.
Yeah.
But they their source of connection to nature is as much connected to the magic as it is sort of from a romantic's perspective. And similarly to like, okay, we got to do something here because our great country's burning, right? And America was beautiful. Like the other day, I was in the Abundance book. Like one of those chapters is about those moments, and it was like, this country's beautiful. Americans deserve to have clean air and enjoy it, right? This is sort of one of the beautiful spots in the world, and it's a creation that we should cherish as such, right? And so that sentiment is very much alive. And similar to that moment, what you're seeing now is like they know now down there, right? Like the other thing that the other thing, like, what are we going to do here if the fish are gone? Right? Like, and there was this other one, was amazing. He's like, what are people going to come to the Keys for? To get drunk and tattooed?
Right.
No, it's like, if we don't have our ocean, and the other day, he, that was sort of a public thing, but in a personal moment, he tells me, like, listen, like, that's what our economy is built on, but also our culture.
Yeah.
Right. So if our fish are gone, everything's gone here. So, and these are like, these are the what we're still looking at, those kind of things aside. It's like, and it's so right. We can't. That's an energy we just want to embrace and be like, wow, how do we work together? Because man, do we agree, right?
Mm-hmm.
I might come at it from a different angle than you, but I cannot tell you how much I couldn't be more aligned with like how you are and how you feel about this kind of stuff.
Right.
And, it is interesting, like, sort of when we talk about, we're going to monitor our stuff, like we can't use the word monitoring, right? Because to that some people, it means that if someone's going to come in and,
government, big brother, right?
Exactly. Force you to do things. So those are like really important, interesting sensitivities to hone. But the core energy is what you want to be working with. Like, and that's the thing. I mean, institutions now to slow everything down, we got to, that's not what we want to do anymore. We need to build a future that serves both and that we can align on and that we can combine forces on.
Yep.
And we got to have this trust that people understand, right? If we give them good data, right, fishery management, the communities are going to manage really well, better than any sort of federal department up in DC, if they have good data and modeling. We're like, if you can increase the quota on your snapper, but that means probably next year they'll make the right decision. So if they have the power in their hands. And that gives us to one thing when I mentioned financial theory, the one thing that I'm really, really excited about on sort of systemic bridge building is, so we've made this cardinal financial mistake, right? And that's sort of that our principal asset nature is not in the accounting system properly, right? It's just not there. So, I have this easy, simple story. I always say, like, if you went to your wealth management guy and he said, give me your $1 million and I'm not that I have $1 million laying around, but if you give me $1 million and I'll give you whatever 10% on it every year, but after 10 years, your $1 million are going to be burnt off. You're like, no, go home. Right. But that's unfortunately how we're looking at nature, right? We're looking at the return. We're not fully appreciating how we're burning the underlying asset and how much value that loses, right? And so, but back to the coral reef, like we're in one of the reasons we can't do that and we haven't done it well is because it requires a lot of complexity, right? So back to the coral reef example, you have to be tracking fish. Another thing about coral reefs, to illustrate the complexity thing is, we've had this carbon market thing that's sort of worked well for us for 20 years. We'll see where it goes now.
Yeah.
but so the carbon value of a coral reef is zero, right? Because what you would need to be tracking in order to assert is like millions of fish, where the carbon is in live fish form, where you kind of want it, right? And that's difficult to do.
Right.
And so at the same time, you have to, figure out how is the energy attenuated, like how does it protect the coast? What's the difference with the insurance guy? So there's a lot of things that need to be accounted for that are difficult to track. And, whales are moving all over the globe, so following them is difficult. But we've got so much technology that is going to like exponentially change our ability to handle complexity. Like AI and quantum, just as two keywords, right?
Yeah.
That human ability for us to not shy away from complex solutions is going to get better.
Yeah.
And as soon as we get better at pricing the underlying asset and like the value of the services of nature and how these things rank, the easier it is to be going to be to have consensus on these decisions and just make them better.
Yeah, that is the golden key. I think that I'm hopeful AI can help us get to is that valuing of nature as an asset. Because I couldn't agree more with you that once that is a giant missing piece of the puzzle that we need to be able to talk and tell that story to the economist and to the person that wants to see the resources, what can they extract from it, not the romantic that loves it for it just being already sees its value, and they probably don't necessarily need the spreadsheet asset value told to them what it is, because they're probably going to say, well, that's still not enough. But to get to a language where we can start to manage these resources as we would other assets that are less complex to quantify, that's going to be a game changer once we can do that better and then continue to improve how we do that into the future. So that's fantastic. I appreciate you bringing that up.
There's tons of reasons to be optimistic about that, right? Because we're seeing these things across all other boards, right? We're just in all sorts of aspects of life, we're just getting better at tracking what you would kind of call soft values and translating them into hard accounting that we use to qualify and value most other things for our decisions. And this it's from health things to what does it mean to be happy? How does happiness translate into healthcare costs? How does water quality transfer into healthcare costs? And so those mechanisms, like we're getting better and better at understanding these kind of things. Or the simple thing, like, what is a lot of our digital financial models are built on attention. Yeah. Right? That's as soft as it gets, and man, is it it's the core of value, right? And so that's something that tech's delivering on across all sorts of sectors, and we're just naturally it's making its way into the environmental piece, and very simply, right? If we can get better at modeling what the difference between a coastline is that is protected by a reef and other ecosystems and one that isn't, that's something you can translate really quickly into insurance premiums, costs, and all that kind of other stuff. Right?
Yeah. So, what do you have to invest in infrastructure to build your, flood wall and your coastal wall to protect your city versus allowing nature to do it because you have the reef and the mangrove forest and everything in place. So
let's make that one quick to finish it off, because I think this is not it's not theoretical thinking. Right, it's like we're working on modeling. Different people are working on these kind of modelations. Like the work with insurance people is being done, and it's the same for fisheries and tourism and all these other kind of numbers where we are working on them. And back to the thread from earlier, what comes with that is. So in order to deliver on those kind of things, right, if you want to reverse engineer that to finance the building of a reef, right, you have to do that with a different mindset where it's not just, we're not going to get grants, scientists, money, and just build it and then say, hey, we did it. We're going to be wanting to be really accountable about putting cameras in the water, tracking things so that we can show what the actual return on investment is, right? Yeah. While we push to decrease costs and do all these other things that you would do in a regular kind of business with all those pressures, right, where I think one of the principal rules of doing business is that you have to make hard decisions, right? You can't relax on purity. You can't always just do everything the way it should be done best.
Right.
You have to deal with, like, I need to sell this stuff. It needs to work. It needs to be financeable. It needs to create returns. Like, more of that kind of thinking is going to help a lot in unlocking resources we have, so far just not tapped into at all.
Yeah.
And if we really take the 1% to the 99 seriously, this shift we're seeing now might really unlock energy that is exponentially faster and stronger than so
get
far.
us to that one generation change that we talked about earlier.
Yeah, and so, like, maybe to finish this off here on a personal part of it.
Yeah, please.
Because what I like, the other part of where we currently are and why it's so much fun to me is that I get to deal with a lot of people who have a similar personal story like mine, right? So people who come from the private sector ended up doing something because they care about the oceans for whatever reason. For me, it's because I married into it. My other partner is because he invented this great thing, and the third one is because he, probably did enough to kind of choose what he could do afterwards. But we're in this ocean sphere, but we come from other backgrounds, right? So we're all really excited about going back into the kind of mechanisms and bringing those two worlds together, and running things on that. Because the other simple thing is, like, if you can do things in a way that they're self-sustaining and profitable, you can hire great people to do great work.
To do more, right?
Yeah, and so, and where they don't have to justify themselves within a grant program, or all that other slowness, or write an impact report so some philanthropic donor is happy, but you just deliver your value every day.
Yeah.
And so this is this is a really interesting announcement of sort of what could be coming. And we talked about that, I think, when we spoke earlier. Like, one of our early taglines was this: hey, what we want is this culture of and, right? Like, why can't I do something that feels good and, rocks the way that my usual work does, and actually gets me paid well because I produce value? Like, why do I have to make this choice between environmental work and ass kicking stuff? Sorry to use that language here.
No.
And
okay.
That's really sort of that shift is going to open those avenues much more.
Absolutely.
Much more than before, to make, like, really great products.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Fritz, I want to be respectful of I could keep talking about this all day because it's absolutely got me fired up and excited about what you're doing and the future of what can be done. But I do want to be honor your time. It's getting later in the evening for you. And is there anything else about Oceans 2050 that, before we kind of transition into the call to action and talking about hope, is there something else that you really want to make sure you get out today while we're talking about this?
No, we've covered a lot of ground here, so it's been interwoven. But to maybe just going back to the sort of development story that we were doing in chronological order.
Yeah.
Like, what we're seeing now is sort of out of many years of running in an organization under this. We have a foundation, right? That's what our work is built on. It's sort of it's built on a nucleus of a sort of a common good nonprofit mindset, right? And so that's what it always was about. It was restoring abundant oceans. And what's happening now is that we're, that's obviously something to keep going with, but we're literally, like, in the process of founding businesses that are going to be rebuilding abundant oceans, sort of under a building perspective. And those two are, fortunately, they're very, very complementary. And you want to be doing both, right? You want to have a sort of a parallel governance between efficiency and great products, and making sure you can balance to go in the right direction. Where you get sort of this common ground that combines the values for everybody to agree on. So I think that's sort of just for the next chapter of what's coming. And that was kicked off by this period of the last couple of months. We were tinkering with these things, what it would look like, and now it's just getting on. This is going on the speed track because of these these transitions that
the
are
changes
happening.
that are happening. Yeah, nice.
So that's why, like with, it felt a little strange, a little scary in the first couple of weeks. But now we're really at this point where like, wow, this is just one of those periods in history where a lot of change is happening. And that is as much opportunity as it is sort
don't miss
a
the
personal
opportunity.
change.
Yeah. Wonderful. Well, after everybody's heard this, I'll make sure to put the website up on our show notes, so folks can go dive a little bit deeper into your organization and learn more about some of the things that maybe we didn't get a chance to touch on. But what's your call to action, Fritz? What do you want people to do after getting to this point in the conversation, and hopefully they're as fired up as I am about action and they want to go do something?
Yeah.
What do you want them to do? How can they support your organization, or what do you want them to do in general to make the world a better place?
Yeah, I think that's always like it's one of those mainstay questions, and it's kind of difficult to answer.
Sure.
But I'll stick to where we are in the moment, right? And then sort of like, and I'm going to do something I usually don't, which is I'm going to sort of start with what not to do, right?
Okay.
And I think what not to do is to kind of lean into the polarization here, where you like stick on your news and like, look what all these guys are doing, and just sort of get stuck in this outrage loop.
Yeah.
Because I think like the specific. Look, this is not America specific, right? We're seeing sort of this reverberate throughout the world, but there's sort of in this strange moment, there's just an amazing opportunity to find together on like stuff that we very simply like. What does the future look like that we want to build, right? And if we remove the ideology, the outrage, this kind of thing, which is I know, and it's difficult, right? Because in social media algorithms, like we know that's the stuff that tends to get fed.
It's amplified, right?
Yeah, and unfortunately, the one thing that's clear about this political time is that sort of these mechanisms, when they kick into place, they tend to push polarization even more. Right?
Absolutely.
And so I think that's sort of the one thing is like get out of that. And I'm going to say this as somebody who's familiar with both worlds, like the nonprofit, the for-profit, the idealists, the pragmatists, sort of the world saviors, and private sector business people, right? There's this great opportunity to get the best of both sides. This time needs a paradigm shift. It wants one. The old sort of the solutions of yesterday are the problems of today. We need all these updates. There's massive change coming with quantum and AI, like the way the world works and things are going to be organized. It's really, really important to embrace the opportunity side of this. Because we're going to be suffering through all this stuff anyway, right? There's going to be all sorts of disruptions. Like, embrace the opportunity, because that's where optimism is, that's where hope is. And this, like, the really exciting aspect of it for everyone is that this culture of and thing is opening up, right? You're going to be able to do work that feels good and rocks if you go look for it, right? It's so cool when you start working with people that sort of on a first sense look like they're on the opposite side, and it's just awesome, right? Learn more from those people and
find that common ground.
Interactions that like, wow, but also like, whoa, they're so right? And all of a sudden you get kind of pulled out of your own muck. You get, liberated from stuff you otherwise wouldn't have questioned.
Yeah.
And in certain ways, you're off to the races into the future. And that's kind of where we want to keep our eyes. Like, what's the future? Not the ideology, not the past. Let's not fight about the why we want something, but sort of there's so much to agree on. Back to the abundance narrative in that book as well.
Yeah.
What's the world look like that we want to build for ourselves and specifically for our future? So it's easier to explain this when you're a parent, but what I often find, whether it's like on German ground, like one great way. So the word sustainability has become a fighting word, right? And it's understandable because it means everything and nothing now. It's so co-opted. It's basically a marketing term, but the underlying idea behind it, when you remove ideology, is super simple, right? It's like, if you've got kids, that you spend half of your life energy building their future. right? Raising them, educating them. Where do you live? What do they eat? Where's schools? Blah, 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 blah. Makes no sense to spend one half of your life's energy to build a good future for your kids and then go to your work and do something else and spend the other half of your life undermining the same thing you're building, right? That makes no sense.
Great story. Yep.
The simple thing, or this other thing, like here, like I'm not going to name names, but one of the projects we're looking at with one of those guys that I appreciate so much, right? So we started talking big picture things there and sort of county programs, but like because we get along so well, all of a sudden he's telling us about here's this island, right, that has sort of family history and it's got damaged by a storm, and can we look at this as well? Like, how do we build this thing? And the way he talks about it is like, while we're talking, so while we're talking, he's like, he shows us we're on Google Earth, the cool tech you have today, and like this is small island with a big K that goes out sort of onto the ocean water. And so he's like, well, we our family used to go there a month every summer. This is a very important family down there in the Keys.
Yeah.
And we would get down to the K and we would get to the island. And when he was a kid, so his parents told him, was like that he would take off his shoes, he would take off his shirt. And then for a month, they couldn't get him off the K.
Yeah.
Right. And then so he's talking about this. And as he's talking about it, he's just like, he's looking at pictures. And then, a little bit later, he says, while we're talking, I sent this to my mom. And she sent me back this photo where I am as a little kid with my father on the K. Right. So one of those great things about, like, when you talk about sustainability, it's not an ideological thing. It's one of those really deep human things, right?
Absolutely.
It's like very simple, like those places, we all have them, like, oceans, waters, outsides, like nature is one of those great galvanizers to make magical moments happen that build generational chains, right? We have these places that our parents took us to. Like I told you earlier in Florence, like I'm here with my kids and all of a sudden this disc of my dad goes into my head and I'm like, wow, and I've got it. It's like a film running in my head, and I can actually talk it back. Like, this is so fascinating.
Yeah.
Right? And sustainability, in its simplest, most positive way, means like that magic that bound you to your parent, that place, that magic, you want to give that to your kids.
Yeah.
In the same richness that it meant to you. That's the simplest of these things, right? So that project, like, that story, I'm like, oh my God, right? This is it. Because that's what, no matter where you are in a political camp or an ideology, that's the stuff we all feel. Like he wants to rebuild that island because he's got that magic there in his, like, generational roots with his father and then grandfather. And now, right now, he can't give it to his kids in the same splendor because the place is messed up, right? And so this is not like an ideological concept. It's a deeply like meaningful thing. And in that kind of stuff, we can all just come together because, man, do we all understand, right? Like all of a sudden sort of
perfect.
That's where restoration, where looking back is actually interesting because you can use the looking back as a vision marker for a future you want to build.
Perfect. I love that story. That and for a call to action to include that story, starting out with the, essentially don't be closed-minded, be open to what others have to say, even if you think they're coming from a different ideological perspective, still be willing and to listen and learn, share your perspective obviously as well, but be open to the other's perspective and find that common ground on, because we all have it. We all have that, as you described, that innate human desire and connection to the earth, to nature, to each other. And if we can all find our place and our way together around that, as opposed to our ideological differences, man, the future does have a bright burning to it. So let's talk about the future. Let's talk about your hopes for the future, as we're kind of winding down the show here. So I talk about hope in every episode, and I don't talk about it from a pink cloud kind of emotional. I talk about it more from a state of mind. It's you have a vision for a better future. You have some a plan of action, some steps you can take. You may not know all of the action or all the steps, but you know a direction to walk in anyway. And you have a sense of agency that you can do something about it to help build that vision for the future. So that's hope. If you have those three aspects in your mind, you have a sense of hope. So Fritz, I want to ask you 3 questions about hope. I'm going to ask you not to think too long about it. Just kind of give your first gut reaction. So the first question for you, Fritz, is what's your vision for a better future? And it can be for you personally or professionally or for the world. Just what's your vision for a better future?
Mm-hmm. Well, the vision here is that this is a period of change that's going to, unlock some very, very interesting opportunities. And I'll be honest, like right now, I'm more optimistic about having sort of an abundant ocean future back, like because I value nature deeply, right? This, like, I always have, we didn't talk about this, but sort of, like many of these kids, in Greece here also, I grew up in the ocean, but it's like, I value that deeply. And I think the chances right now to get there are better than ever, right? Like the opportunity, we wouldn't have thought the things that we're thinking now if sort of this crazy period of change hadn't happened in this abruptness and this severity.
Yeah. And
I think like things are going to come together that we didn't think would come together in certain ways. Like there's going to be also, there's all sorts of uncertainties in on the way here with AI and all these like speedy things. But that's the nature of humans, right? It's been the same thing, same way forever. And I think it's actually a time for, there's a qualifier that I love for hope. There was a book a while ago called Active Hope, right? And so and there's an article that really shaped me for a while, like the difference between optimism and hope. And it's the right now, like there's just so much stuff to do that's coming, like to get up and bring expertises in. This move from 1% to 99 is massive. Right, it's so much opportunity to apply skills that we have. Right, sort of. I mentioned this earlier.
Yeah,
architect, builders, tech guys, like
tapping all that energy
and doing their stuff in totally unexpected contexts, and like just get to build great shit. Right, there's a real liberation in some of these chains that are breaking right
now. I agree.
And there's a lot of hope to be had in that. Right. This sort of, it takes and I know this is hard. I've always loved it. Like in retrospect, when we talk about human stories, it's often the things that feel like absolute crises that when you look back, like, oh my, simple thing. Before I met my wife, like my girlfriend of 9 years left me. Right. So the first time anything ever went wrong. Today, I'm like, man, that's the most important period of my life, right? It's
absolutely,
like,
yeah.
Phew.
I can relate to,
So,
on
and I think it's going to be one of those periods where we look back and say, wow, that felt weird, but man, did a lot of important things happen.
Yeah,
and that's what's.
So, with this vision, then, for taking. For looking for the opportunities and taking advantage of the opportunities and building this better future that might be a little fuzzy right now, might be a little uncomfortable right now and scary right now for many folks. Why is that your vision? Why I know it's kind of been the whole time we've talked about it, this whole episode, but why is that important to you?
It's a perfect setup, right? Let's go, to just sort of summarize a lot of the things we talk about. I think the simple reality is this, right? Well, I'll get geeky for a minute, right? Ecology, where does the word come from? I told you I went to a Jesuit school, so English was
got that Latin
was my first, English was the second, ancient Greek was the third. So it comes from house management, right? It's literally a management word, like it's sort of and the simple truth is, like, in a rich world, we're all better, right? And this is natural world, like that's most of what's going on in this planet, and we're understanding this now.
Yeah.
Much better. We're getting smarter about it. Doesn't seem like it yet, but we're like, the stuff on my table is like, this stuff's coming. Where we become much smarter about this. So like, what you just said is sort of the most important tool is like, what is that vision, right? That we can go to. Another beautiful line from these guys, I think they're called elementalists, like, without a vision for the future, you end up reacting your way into it.
Absolutely.
Right. So when we talk about like restoring abundance, this benchmark of, hey, we can have abundant oceans in one generation, that's something to, align people on, right?
Yeah.
And so this vision of where we have an abundant planet back, that is sort of the base of life quality, right? For most of us, I think, sort of clean air, beautiful skies, somewhere to go, places to share with your kids. That's a great place to start in all this stuff that feels so messy, right? And,
yeah.
It's also one of the great antidotes to these screens that suck up so much of our, life and happiness, and give us so much back and neck pain because we're staring at the wall.
Yep, true.
No, so that's what we're summarizing here. Like, that's why this is so much fun as an architect as well. Like, building reefs, like, wow, how funky is that, man? Right? But at the same time, we know that when we get to build reefs, in the real estate developments of developments in the coast in the future, the houses you're going to be planning these things from the balcony that people look all the way into the oceans. Like, that's cool. So there's all this, like, when you think that vision down, where, hey, we're gonna make a massive step. We made a huge wisdom error in not appreciating this beautiful underlying asset of human life properly. We're going to get better at it, and that means we're going to be much, able to make much wiser decisions.
Yeah, perfect. So, last question.
Yeah.
Imagine now that future you just described, this abundant future that we're aiming for. Imagine that is happening right now, that we made it. We're in it. We're in that abundant future. How does that make you feel?
Well, God, that's fun. And imagine, like, the easiness of things. Like, that's fun. Imagine, look, let's flip this, right? This is a worry humans have never had to have before, right? Like, for a while, when we I think it was in 2013, well, I don't know, there was a study that came out that was heartbreaking. It was about how 20 to 26-year-olds see the world.
Yeah.
Right. And we talked about growing up in Berlin earlier. And I literally cried after I read it. Right. Because I remember what it was like when I was 20. We did not have a worry in the world. It was like, Monday to Friday, get your schoolwork done. Sports, go to practice and then party hard, and girls and whatever it is, right? No worries. Back, rinse and repeat on Monday.
Yeah.
Right. But no future worry whatsoever.
Right.
And we've also had 70, 80 years of peace, right? Like, we've had this, in the West, we've had this great blessing of, like, not having to have foundational future worries.
Right.
Right. And now here's this generation that has climate anxiety, and, like, we also really want to ask ourselves, is the way we're selling climate change, like, is that a good thing? The way we did this doom and threat scenario for everyone, like,
we didn't sell a better future. We just sold a future where we're gone. We're done.
Yeah. So now imagine, like, that pressure off our chests, like, our 20 to 26-year-olds being like, oh, wait, this is we get to shape our lives, and it's it's this, like, maker's attitude, and not this anxiety burden. That's going to be great.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate the work that you are doing, and that Alexandra is doing, and Carlos is doing, and all the other great collaborators that you're working with, and partnerships that you're building around the world. So thank you very much, Fritz, for your time and sharing.
It's always a pleasure.
This abundant future that we're working towards. I'd love it. So I will leave you with the last word, because, again, I can keep talking to you all day. This is such a great conversation. I really appreciate your time, but I'll leave you with the last word.
Oh, well, that's a big burden. Yeah, let's take the last. Like, don't let it get you, right? Don't let the news cycles get you. Try to step out of the ideology. See, like, how much. Let's be cosmic for a little bit, right? What we see as the other side, most part, it's just our counterpart, right? Like, so there's so much to learn from that, and as always, sort of we can get yingy yangy or whatever
Yin
else we
yangy.
want.
I was just thinking
The
the same
moment,
thing.
the moment you can let go of this idea that one side needs to win, right?
Yeah.
You know that when you meet in the middle, things flourish.
Yeah.
Right. And that's what we want to be looking for right now. Where's
Absolutely.
that cool stuff that we got to learn, let to go, get rid of, focus on? Wow, how much does that? There's one more thing. Let's start this one. There's one great thing to be optimistic about. Last word, vision, all of this. The great thing that I think always happens is that when we get off the ideology, right, and we tend to, it's so easy to fall into sort of demonizing the other person when you don't see them. When you actually get together every day to build stuff, what happens when humans build stuff together is always the same. When you're with somebody, you work on something together, instead of seeing the things that drive you apart, you start seeing again, oh, look at all the stuff we have in common.
We can do together,
right? And then all of a sudden, like this, I think it's the same in marriages even. Like that's when people do stuff together, when they build something together. Oh, you Americans have this beautiful thing of a barn raising, right? Like there's amazing communion in that.
Yeah.
And when we commune, we get to rediscover that we actually have more in common than what drives us apart.
Absolutely.
And that we all thrive when we can meet and like act in the middle.
Perfect. Well, Fritz, thank you so much. The messy middle is where I try to find myself every day, and I couldn't agree more with your last word there. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Steven. Always a pleasure.
I wish you all the best, and I look forward to staying in contact as the years go by. So
same, absolutely.
All right.
See you next time.
Take care.
Take care. You too. Bye-bye.
What an inspiring conversation with Fritz Neumeyer. In today's episode, the second half of my discussion with Fritz, we explored how personal experience shapes our understanding of environmental legacy and how the Cousteau family's influence continues through Oceans 2050. We discussed the shift from a narrative of conservation to one of restoration, and how optimism, when coupled with science, storytelling, and community collaboration, can help us restore ocean abundance within one generation. I hope within my lifetime. We also touched on the economic value of healthy ecosystems, the role of emerging technologies like AI and quantum computing, and the importance of bridging ideological divides to build a truly inclusive movement. Fritz's message that we can and must move beyond a mindset of scarcity to embrace one of abundance, well, that really resonates with me. It's not either or, it's yes and. Yes, we must conserve what remains untouched, and we must proactively restore what's been damaged. This dual commitment is essential if we hope to leave behind a better world for future generations. It's also not either or when faced with restoring the environment or growing the economy. We are often given this false dichotomy, forcing us to choose between either the environment or the economy. It's just not the case. Fritz and I talked about Florida as an example. Restoring the coastal fisheries and coral reefs off the coast of Florida is good for the ocean, and it's good for Florida's economy. And I deeply appreciate Fritz's inclusive approach to building common ground. His belief that different political ideologies can unite around a shared vision of ocean restoration is not just hopeful, it's strategic. I've seen this abundant, inclusive approach work firsthand in my career, especially during my time working on the San Antonio River Improvements Project. We were able to garner broad bipartisan support by communicating the project's diverse benefits: flood safety and economic revitalization for those on the right, environmental restoration and public access to nature for those on the left. That kind of messaging brought people together and helped us achieve one of the largest urban ecosystem restoration projects in the nation, which garnered global recognition for its innovative and successful approach to multi-benefit watershed management. Now is the time to move beyond scarcity and embrace abundance. Now is also the time to walk away from political divisiveness and embrace political inclusivity. Fritz reminds us that collaboration isn't just a compromise, it's a catalyst. And with technologies like AI and quantum computing now entering the space, we have new tools to accelerate progress. That gives me real hope for the future of our oceans and our planet. So I want to thank Fritz for his vision, his leadership at Oceans 2050, and his passion for a world where restoration isn't a dream, it's a blueprint. And to Alexandra Cousteau as well. I thank both Fritz and Alexandra for their tireless work in helping make this world a better, more abundant place. My audience, please let this conversation be your call to action. You can support ocean restoration by learning more at oceans2050.com, sharing stories like this one, and advocating for local marine or watershed restoration projects in your own community. Get involved with coastal cleanups, support sustainable fisheries, or even just start a conversation with your neighbors about how environmental restoration benefits everyone, ecologically, economically, and socially. If Stories Sustained Us move you, please help me continue sharing these powerful stories. You can support me by subscribing, rating, and reviewing the show, sharing it with family, friends, and colleagues, and following the show on social media. I really appreciate all your support. And be sure to join me for the next episode coming June 10th, when I'll sit down with a water policy and project specialist from New Mexico to discuss the challenges and opportunities of protecting fresh water in one of the driest states in the nation. It's a vital conversation about riverine, wetland, and watershed preservation in a place where every drop counts. Catch the next episode of Stories Sustain Us on June 10th at storiessustainus.com, wherever you listen to podcasts, and on YouTube. Thank you so much for being here with me today. Keep believing in the power of storytelling, keep showing up, and keep making the world a better place. Till next time, I'm Stephen Schauer. Please take care of yourself and each other. Take care.